So good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Salma Zulfiqar. I'm an artist and a human rights activist. I hope you're safe and well during these troubled times. I hope you're having a relaxed evening in lockdown with a cup of tea or a glass of wine and mince pies or whatever else you're doing to relax tonight. During this evening, we're going to take you on a journey around the world with the Migration Blanket film, which I created with refugee and asylum seeker girls and women during the corona crisis over the last few months. It's a short film and it's part of the Migration Blanket project, which I started in 2018 with women in Birmingham. And this is an artwork which has been exhibited in Venice during Venice Biennale last year. And it shows the hopes and the dreams of migrant and refugee women in Birmingham. So the film is actually a continuation of the project, and this shows the struggles of refugee girls and women in the UK, in Greece, Italy, Turkey, Jordan, Yemen, India, Pakistan, Kenya, and Niger. So we basically, were able to, through a series of workshops, bring together girls and women during the crisis to allow them to create and be able to have a voice during this time, which they haven't been able to do. Some of the girls live in refugee camps, some were in orphanages, and some of them in temporary accommodation. So a whole mixture of different places. It's been a real challenge over the last 6 to 8 months for everyone. And I think the project really is testament to the resilience of refugees as well. The film contains over 100 pieces of artworks, which, as I mentioned, were created in workshops in Art Connects, which is the social enterprise project that I established a few years ago. So these workshops were held during lockdown, and I hope that this film really gives people an insight into their lives during lockdown and during the crisis. It's about bringing out more compassion during this period of time. It's about calling for global solidarity with refugees and migrants. And I hope that the film's going to be an educational tool. There are many stories in the artwork, personal accounts from girls and women. Many of them are vulnerable and, as I mentioned, didn't have the chance to express themselves. And having worked as a journalist before as well, it's important for me to connect with the media through my work in changing the narrative and changing the story around migration at the moment with everything that's happening and with Brexit as well. So we are going to show you the film, as I mentioned, and we hope that we'll have some conversations a bit later on about your thoughts about the film and also on the whole issue of migration at the moment. And here, I know we had some technical difficulties in the beginning, but I hope you were able to see the film in its entirety. Thank you, Pranvira and Mario from the Frontline Club. Just want to say a big thank you for that, because it's not always easy to show films in webinars with the technology. So I hope you had. I hope that the film provoked some thoughts on the issue of migration, and in particular with refugee girls and women. We'd like also to hear from you, your questions. You can, there's a Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, so you can send us your questions that we can answer a bit later on with the panelists, who I'll introduce in a short while. And we can also come to you if you want to do your question live as well. So without further ado, I'm going to give you some information about who we've got with us today to discuss the film and the issue of migration. As I mentioned, there's some girls who took part from camps in the Middle East. We have with us today Tasneem and Malak, who are in Zatari camp in Jordan. And this is one of the biggest refugee camps in the world. And it's more or less a city. We also have Mohammed Al-Tahir, who works in the camp, who's joining us for any translation, because Tasneem and Malak aren't native English speakers, but I think they speak English very well. So if you have any questions for them a bit later on, please send them through. Our second guest will be Lejla Damon, who's a Bosnian refugee and an activist. She's also a recipient of the Points of Light award given by the Prime Minister's office, and she's done some incredible work on an advocacy work around stopping violence against women in conflict in particular. This project was created in collaboration with the UN's Refugee Agency, and it wouldn't have been possible to do it without them, and I'll explain a bit more about that later on. So we also have Matthew Saltmarsh, who's a senior spokesman from the UNHCR UK office. So I'm going to start by having a little chat with Tasneem and Malak so that they can tell you a bit about their involvement in the project and give you a bit of an insight into the camp as well. So ladies, if you can turn your microphones on, Tasneem and Malak. I'm just going to ask you a few questions, if that's okay.
Salma.
Yeah, great. So Tasneem, do you want to go first? If you can tell us a bit about your life in the camp.
Yes. Good evening, everyone. This is Tasneem Al-Nabilsi, a refugee to Zatari camp in Jordan since 2013. I'm 20 years old, and I'm a senior student of translation and an artist. So, as I said before, I came to Jordan since 2013, and I think that I was lucky enough to have this chance and to survive from the war in Syria.
Okay, thank you, Tasneem. And Malak, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Malak. Live now in Zatari camp. I came to Zatari like Tasneem the same year, 2013. The first I thought we just live here for 2 months, 3 months, to the situation become more safety. But I think this is the 8 years here, unfortunately. But it's okay. We're doing well here. And now I'm studying medical laboratory, and I'm an artist too.
Great, thank you. And can you tell us a bit about what you drew for the project? What pictures did you create, and why you made that particular picture? Tasneem?
Yes, of course. So my picture was I drew that to express my state during the coronavirus. Actually, it was that girl that is sitting and holding her chin with her hand, and she's waiting, and her head is full of black ideas out of the crisis and out of the lockdown. Actually, at that time when I drew this picture, I was in that situation and that status. So this girl is depressed, actually, because her entire lifestyle has changed to be online, let's say. So that's what I can express about that picture.
Okay, thanks. And Malak?
I draw about me. I draw 2 pictures. The first one about the women's in the Zatari camp, and the second one about me. I think it also speak about everyone here, you know, because of coronavirus, everyone was have a stress and was suffering. For me, as an artist, I couldn't leave the camp to get the material to paint and to study. So that's make me more stressed, and I um, couldn't to make my idea, put it in like as a drawing. So this confused me and make me like makes my hand like a tied.
Yeah, you drew a picture of your hands tied, didn't you, like this?
Yeah.
It's quite a powerful image. Ladies, can I ask you what you hope the film will do? Tasneem, do you want to go first?
Of course. I think that this film is holds a quite powerful idea and message of refugees from all over the world, and I think that it shows that that the same crisis or the same problems that all refugees are living, that they are maybe different from outside, but they are same versions from inside, that they are full of hope and ambition and dreaming of a better life and a better future. So I hope this message can reach to all people in the world, to refugees, and maybe to support them, and for people to be able to be aware how refugees are strong and how they suffer actually, and for these people to be able to help us.
Thank you. And Malak?
Okay, for me, when I did this meeting with you, and when I meet these girls, the other girls from refugee from all over the world, and I shared them the idea and the hope, the worries, that make me more less stressful. Okay, and you know, this meeting, it was like we are have a cup of stress. Okay, and this meeting embedded away. So I hope this show reach for all the refugee to see we are the same, and make them suffering less, and for the other people to see how we are suffering, and maybe they can help us.
Great. So I know you were saying to me that one of the things was that you felt that being connected to other refugees really made you understand that you're all, you know, together in the same situation. It helped you see things very differently.
Yeah, we are in the different countries, but we are have the same problems, the same suffering, the same worries. But
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, no, thanks. I mean, that, you know, that was one of the things that the workshops brought out, that the, you know, the refugees and the girls who took part basically had no idea of what was happening in different countries with refugees, and it helped them actually connect with the refugees in other countries as well as giving their message to the general public about the need to have, you know, solidarity with everyone. Mohammed, I just want to ask you as well, you know, what is life like in the camp at the moment in lockdown? You've been an amazing support for the project. I have to say, I contacted lots of charities and asked them to take part to spread the message about the workshops, but unfortunately they weren't able to, for whatever reasons, and they weren't able to reach out to the refugees. And then, you know, through UNHCR offices, people were able to, you know, spread the message, and we had quite a few offices participating in the project. So if you can tell us a bit more about the camp, that would be great.
Yeah, good evening for everybody. As you mentioned that Zaatari camp was established here in Jordan in July 2012. So now we are going for the 9th year of the age of Zaatari camp now in Jordan. Zaatari camp now hosted like 80,000 refugees now. The majority of them, they came at the beginning of the crisis back in Syria. And now we have another, big camp also in Jordan, which is Azraq camp, hosted like 50,000 refugees, Syrian refugees, I mean. Because in Jordan, just to give an overview about the situation here in Jordan, we have like 52 different nationalities as refugees in Jordan. So we are talking about a big number of the people flee their countries to come to Jordan seeking for some security and to have. Can you hear me, right?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, sorry, because I felt that I was disconnected. Many refugees, they just flee their country and coming to Jordan here seeking for security and for protection. Zaatari camp is, let's say, a special profile camp here in Jordan because it has a long period of time since establishing, as I mentioned, in 2012. Now we have another challenge during the coronavirus, because as we know, this is a challenge for all the countries around the world and also directly affected the refugees here economically, and also in addition for that, socially for all refugees who are inside the camp. Because the Jordan government, in addition for UNHCR, we took some let's say action just to keep the refugees safety and to keep the refugees out of the coronavirus as much as we can. Because of that, this affects the refugees who are holding like the work permit, because as we know, Jordan is one of the country allowing refugees to work in the labor market freely and have a work permit, allowing them to work outside the camp. Nowadays, the Jordan government stopped allowing the refugees to go outside the camp to work, not to reduce the contact with the other people and to bring the, let's say, the infection to inside the camp, which this affect the people more and more. But nowadays, thanks for all these efforts, even the level of the infection inside the camp, it is lower than the level outside the camp, because of the very strict, let's say, action taken just to reduce that inside the camp. For UNHCR, we are doing all the effort and our best just to provide the dignity and to provide the better life for the refugees inside the camp with what we have in our hands. Just to relieve them a little bit from the let's say side effect of the coronavirus and for the challenge of the refugee itself here in Jordan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to say thank you once again for, supporting the project and supporting these girls to help them, improve their artwork and to be able to showcase their artwork as well. Tasneem and Malak, just one more question for both of you. How do you think we can change media coverage around, refugees and migrations? Do you have any thoughts about that? Anything you would like to say?
May I go first?
Yes, sure.
Yeah, so I think for media that it can send the message or transfer the message for all refugees, and I think that to transfer the exact message of these refugees, the successful stories of girls and boys from inside the camp, and all people who are starting a new life in this camp, in order for other refugees who may cannot find any opportunity to start a better life, in order for them to get some help from all around the world.
Okay, thank you.
So
And
actually, as I said before, yes, thank you.
sorry, what were you going to say?
So I was going to say that to show the world through these stories how these people are strong, and to show them how much they suffered to reach this point. Yeah,
It's
thank
like
you.
the same I want to say. The same, to show the people how in difficult condition this girl they able to be creative,
Okay.
and maybe people can help them, because there's many people they many girls they finished the high school and they looking for the scholarship, so maybe people can help them.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Okay. So thank you, ladies. We'll move on to
Another
our.
thing,
Sorry. Yeah.
sorry,
One more
another thing. I want to speak like people like me, okay? And I will graduate this year, and I want to complete my studies in master. So maybe I can found a scholarship out the Jordan. I want to learn more and more. I can
Okay.
get the skills more, English, many things.
Great. Okay. Thank you. So just a reminder for everyone who's on the call today, please send us your questions. So once our panelists have made their comments, you'll be able to ask them some questions, either in the Q&A box, or you can raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question live. So next we'll go to Lejla Damon, who is a refugee from Bosnia, and is also an activist. And Lejla, you have an amazing story to tell, so I think you should tell that yourself rather than me doing a big introduction.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the introduction. And also just to say, I'm full of a cold, like it's that Christmas burnout time. But no, honestly, it's an absolute pleasure to be on the call with all you guys. I think events like this are just fantastic, bringing people together and telling each other stories and just giving a new perspective, and just, it's what it's all about. My story in particular, so I was born in 1992 on Christmas Day during the war in Bosnia. My birth mum was raped and she was held in a concentration camp from about early April. So I was one of the first kind of children born of rape to come out of the Bosnian War. My parents, who were Sky journalists, freelance at the time, basically did an interview and a kind of cut spot story on baby born on Christmas Day, the first children to be born of rape and so on, and they ended up adopting me. And I lived in Hungary for the first 3 years, and I've lived in the UK ever since. So I suppose my journey along and connected to sexual violence was, I was always aware that I was born from Bosnia, and we went back, and I was always told about my roots and very much encouraged to go and explore them in whatever way I wanted to. It wasn't until I was 18 that I was told about the circumstances of my adoption and what my birth mum had been through. And it was that kind of, it was that moment where I decided that when I was 19 and I'd gone to uni, I really wanted to find my birth mum, or I wanted to see whether or not I could track her down. So I contacted the Bosnian British Embassy in London, and they managed to track her down. So we had about 4 years of letter contact, and I finally went and met her in October, I think it was 2018. And I also met, because I'd done lots of campaigning. So I worked for War Child, I've worked for Remembering Srebrenica, I did the Ending Sexual Violence and Conflict Summit. That was when I suppose I first came out with my story. and I'd obviously done a lot of interviews with people, academics, about, you know, that kind of topic of children that were born of rape, because I know there's a lot of research done on the victims, yet there's not so much done on the children. And this woman put me in contact with another girl called Ina, and she was my age, and she was also born of rape, but she was based in Bosnia. And it was, and honestly, you guys, like what you were saying before about finally meeting someone where you're like, we may not be the same, we may not be from the same country, but we're refugees, and I get your connection. Like, that was my first connection, because obviously growing up in London, and having all my friends were pretty much British or from England anyway, being adopted and a child born of rape was quite unusual. So when I met her, it was just amazing, and we just we hit it off. And yeah, and basically we've become the founders of the first charity called Children Born of War, which is based in Bosnia, and it has about 75 members of, you know, women and men who were born during the Bosnian War out of rape and conflict. So it's the first of its kind, and it's really amazing to see the work that they're doing out there. Obviously, I'd go out there as much as I could, but obviously, given the current circumstances, that's not possible at the moment. But it's just one of them where I don't know whether I don't feel like it's an obligation to be an activist, or whether, you know, I'm not doing this necessarily out of guilt. However, I do think it's just so important that we share stories, especially in the current climate that we're living in. It's like it can be so toxic and so negative. And my story, even though, yes, it came from something that was incredibly horrible, and I can't begin to imagine what my birth mum went through. You know, I've met my birth mum and we have a relationship. I don't speak Bosnian, so the texts are limited. But we have a connection, and I think that that's just really empowering. Like, she didn't need to obviously do that, and neither did I, but it's one of those stories that comes full circle, and we're still on our journey in terms of like a relationship together, because we still don't fully know each other. But in terms of activism and going forward, I think it's just so important that we deliver the message, like the video that you've produced, and, you know, and do it through the arts, or do it through some sort of medium in which makes people actually think and that they can relate to. And I will continue doing loads of work, hopefully. This year's been quite quiet, not gonna lie, but yeah, it's just a pleasure to be here. And thank you so much, guys, for sharing your stories before. It was amazing.
Thank you, Lejla. That's a pretty amazing story to tell as well. We have a couple of questions coming in, and I'll come back to you, I think, on those.
Sure.
And just read out some comments from Malak and Tasneem before we go to Matt from UNHCR. We had a comment from Nasreen saying, Nasreen Saif, I think you're in India, is that right? Saying that you agree with Malak, some girl refugees finish their high school in difficult situations and they can't continue their education. She's a living example. My question is it possible to give us a chance to continue our education? Maybe, I don't know, Matt also can answer that when he speaks, if that's okay. And you know, also she says, we are all refugees and girls and women that live in uncomfortable situations in other countries. So, you know, the difficulties there of having that added, you know, complication. Okay, so we'll move on to Matt now, Matt Saltmarsh from the UNHCR UK office. Matt, if you'd like to make your comments.
Yeah, thank you very much, Salma, and thank you for bringing this project to us. And thanks to all the women and girls who have been involved in it. I think the testimonies we've heard tonight have been extremely powerful, especially about the sense of stress that's been experienced, the suffering, but also, as Lejla said, about that sense of being in the same situation as others and being able to relate to that. And having sat in on a few of Salma's sessions during COVID, I think I can testify that it has been a very powerful therapeutic session and something that's been really positive to many people. So thanks again. And maybe I'll just say a few words about sort of the global situation and about education, and then we can hand it over to the questions. I think just to set everything in context here, globally, we are seeing a significant increase in what we call forced displacement. So the numbers of refugees, people who cross borders, but also people who are displaced within their own borders, internally displaced people. That's obviously primarily a result of increased conflict. We're seeing a lot of new conflicts across the world, but also protracted conflicts that have not been resolved. For example, Afghanistan is now 4 decades old as a conflict. As we've heard, the Syria conflict is coming up to the 10-year milestone, and there are many others as well. Newer conflicts we've seen in places like the Sahel, which is a big concern. We now have 2 million people forcibly displaced in the Sahel. And there are real concerns there about governance, about the economy, and of course about climate. And these factors are starting to come together, and they really are creating a much bigger problem. I mentioned it's rising, the problem. Global forced displacement is now estimated at 80 million people, with about 30 million refugees. That's more or less double the levels that it was at a decade ago. So it's a serious global problem, and it's becoming worse. And of course, we now have COVID. So COVID is really layering, an emergency on top of the existing emergency. Not only is it the health crisis, which of course we know about, that's global, but really concerning to us and to others in this sector is the economic crisis that has gone with it and that will continue to go with it for the short term, possibly well into the medium term. On the economic side, a lot of refugees around the world had been reliant on informal work, and a lot of that work has simply dried up. It's disappeared. We've got data from places like Rwanda that shows a huge decline in the number of refugees who are working, studies from other parts of the world as well. So that really is a major concern about COVID. And actually, the international community has been, until now, quite generous with supporting organizations like UNHCR and our partners for the COVID response. I think the concern is going forward for the next couple of years, will that be able to be sustained? Because of course, countries like the UK, the US, the traditional donors have their own significant COVID issues at home. And so a lot of the resources are going into that. But just to say a few words about women and gender-based issues, this is another factor of COVID that has really been amplified. We've got quite a few studies that show that the number of women who have been affected by gender-based violence has increased as a result of being isolated in a small shelter or house with a potentially abusive partner or spouse. We have data that show that gender-based violence has in fact increased in about 27 countries in which we work, but we don't have, systematic data on this. So a lot of this is just piecemeal stuff, reports here and there and anecdotal stuff, but we know it is a significant and growing problem. It's been referred to as a shadow pandemic by one of our partner UN organizations. And I think one of the problems has been, because of a lack of funding, a lot of the resources tend to go into initial emergency support. So we've got Malak and Tasneem who are in Zaatari camp. in the case of the Syria crisis, a lot of the resources went into creating the structures, the shelter, the initial support, but then a lot of support tends to dry up, and factors like issues like gender-based violence and education can be seen as somewhat secondary. So it really is imperative for the international community to make sure that these issues aren't swept under the carpet and are kept very much out in the front, in the forefront. And that's why I think it's so important that initiatives like Salma's are supported, and that's why UNHCR supported it here in the UK, but also in other places around the world. Word education, because it is so important, and we heard from Malak how she really wants to try to finish her studies and to get a master's degree. Again, it's something that isn't or hasn't traditionally been in the forefront of refugee response, but again, we're trying to push it in there, and some of the donors have been more receptive to it in recent years. We now have a scheme called the DAFI program, which is primarily funded by Germany. That has some thousands of places that can go to refugees a year, fully funded scholarships. It's nowhere near enough. What you see with refugee education is levels of attendance in primary schools start relatively high, and then when you get to secondary school, they start to drop, as refugees quite often need to support the family, the household, through going out to work, or in some cases, women are forced into early marriage, unfortunately. So the drop-off rates pick up in secondary school. And then as you get into tertiary education or further education, they become tiny. You're talking about 2% or something. So there, we have the DAFI scheme. There are other scholarships as well. In the UK, different universities have worked independently to set up scholarships, and we have in this country, we have a really proactive group called STAR, Student Action for Refugees, which is a great resource that works with the different universities to promote those scholarships and to put information online and to try and get more refugees into education. But it is a huge challenge, and quite often it involves going to a different location within the country of asylum, or going to a third country, and with that comes so many complications around movement and finances as well. So it's something we are aware of and pushing hard to try to improve, but it is a really big issue. But I think it was a great testament to Malak to hear just how passionate she is about education, and the realization of how important it is to be able to transform her life and to try and be able to start anew somewhere else. So thanks again, Salma, for giving me the time to speak here. I'll leave it there, but of course happy to pitch in with answers to any questions that might be coming.
Great, thank you. Just to add to that, I mean, we had someone in our Art Connect session, an asylum seeker who identifies to be LGBT, and she basically has been in the country since 2012, and never knew that she could access education. So through our workshop, she was able to. She's actually found herself a scholarship now, and has enrolled. So there is education out there that's available, that's free, higher education as well. And Nasreen, if you have any questions, we can about that, we can speak to you about that. Nasreen has just put some more information in the Q&A about her situation as well. She's saying, I'm living in India since 2016 and originally from Afghanistan. We're happy to give you information if you need it as well afterwards. If you have any questions, as I mentioned, it'd be good if you could just please send them through the Q&A, and we'll be happy to answer them. This is your chance. I mean, you know, having the ladies from the camp as well was quite challenging, with technology, etc. So it's your chance to ask them a question and learn more about their lives as well. We had some questions about violence against women from Mohammed Hiribe. And he says, despite the efforts being made to safeguard women, many governments still don't implement the law as required towards stopping violence against women. What do we think we can do to curb this situation? Lejla, do you want to answer that?
I'll try and answer it. So, I mean, even in this country, I work for a charity called Rape Crisis, so I'm on the helpline, and I volunteer. So basically 2 nights a week, I'll be there for 5 hours, and anyone that needs to call, you know, I'm just there. I can point them in the direction of whatever services they might need, or I'm just there to speak to them in general. But like, even in this country where it's like, I think it was something shocking, I think it's 180,000 women a year get raped in Britain. But not only that, the percentage rate of actually like managing to get a successful verdict in terms of court is 3%. So, and it's not just one quick fix. Like, sexual violence in conflict's one thing, because I mean, it is used as a weapon of humiliation, shame. A lot of the time it means you're stigmatized and can't go back to your village or your family. That was definitely how my birth mum felt anyway. But like, it's got to be a societal change, like a societal view change, which takes, as we are fully aware, takes a really long time. And it's not just one person that can make that change. You know, it's all very well and good, me campaigning for, you know, against gender-based violence, but at the end of the day, it should just be something that's just not accepted. Whereas, and we haven't got it in the UK, we haven't got it in the US or in any of the Western cultures, let alone in other countries that have a highly patriarchal society, and then let alone in war. So I think we're a long way off, but I'm still hopeful that everything that, you know, we're doing, everything, all the connections that we're making, even this event, like, and just even asking these questions, like, they're good, their progress in the step in the right direction. So it's not just going to be one thing that changes gender-based violence. Unfortunately, it's like attitudes towards women, you know, and it goes on. You know, we're not necessarily even at the equal pay section yet, let alone being seen as an equal. So I think there's a lot of work to do, but obviously if you can champion and be a voice of and an advocate in that area, then I think, and just kind of challenge people and challenge people's perspectives, then I think that's all we can do at the moment. It's not going to take one person, it'll take an entire society. So I feel like, I'm sorry if I haven't fully answered your question. It's a very hard answer and I don't fully have it. But yeah, it's not just one thing, it's a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's a complex issue. You know, and part of the issue is that women also don't come forward, you know, themselves. So that's one of the biggest issues. And some of the women I work with who are in abusive or potentially violent situations, having spoken to them and trying to encourage them to do something about it, it can be quite difficult because they're too scared to leave or do anything about it, or they've been in a situation where you know, the outcome they've seen things happen where the outcome has not been you know, favourable to them. So it's really difficult. But one of the things we try and do with the project as well is educate women on their rights, you know, basic rights. And for me, it's so shocking how many girls and women don't know their rights, not only in the developing world, but also in the developed world.
No,
so,
for sure.
This, you know, it's a very complex issue.
I know for sure, like at school, like, you know, in PHSE or, you know, relationship studies or whatever, like women were never taught like coercion, say the power to say no, it's okay. You know, yes, there's that whole peer pressure element, but you never, like I was never told, okay, well, if you don't want to do something, you can say no. Like, and that is fine, let alone what your human rights are as a woman, even in this country. So I think there's a long way to go, and there's also a long way to go in the sense of minorities in rape. Like the percentage of women that come forward and, you know, go to a clinic after it's happened are predominantly white women. So we saying that Indian women, Chinese women, whoever you are, aren't getting raped. It's just it's like how we tap into that. Like, how do we manage, like, how do we get to them? Because they're the ones that, are going to be really struggling. And
they're facing additional barriers, culture, maybe language, other things that stop them from going, making that step forward. We also have another question from Mohammed. Many girls have been impregnated due to COVID-19. How can we sensitize women and girls on prevention methods? And that's from two of the girls at the orphanage in Kenya, Aisha and Huda. This is something that we're going to hear more and more about, I think, you know, as time goes by during this crisis. Any thoughts on that, any of the panelists? No. I would just say that how can we sensitize? I mean, education, I've already mentioned, you know, I think women need to know what their rights are. They need to be empowered. They need to be educated. That's part of, you know, the process. That's the first step. And education is really important in that as well. So that's what I would say. Would anyone like to add anything?
Yeah, like I agree with you. I lived in Ghana for 3 months doing voluntary work out there just after I'd finished uni, and there was sex education, schooling and farming. Those were the kind of initiatives we were working on. And like as soon as a girl gets pregnant, she drops out of school, and that's as young as like potentially 13. So without that education, you don't ever learn what your rights are. But then not only that, you have a cultural barrier, because a lot of the time they're not having sex, or, you know, they haven't had sex while they're pregnant. So it is a real struggle. Like I thought I was going to make a real impact out there. And I remember going there and I was just like, wow, this is tough. This is really tough. But no, exactly what you said, education, because the longer they can stay in school, the more they can develop who they are, rather than dropping out, having babies when they're only children themselves.
Right, yeah. I just want to also talk a little bit about, just changing the subject slightly, about media and you know, their involvement in journalists and coverage of migration and refugees. Do we have any journalists with us on the webinar today? I mean, what do you think about, you know, we've seen a lot about the media being, you know, basically having a heavy-handed approach, some media outlets, to the issue of migration, and not being, you know, not fairly reporting what's going on. Any comments on that, or anything you'd like to say? Any of the panelists, would you like to say anything on that?
Maybe I could say a few words. I think that if we go back to 2015, and this is looking at things from a sort of European perspective, there was obviously a big increase in media interest in the refugee quote unquote crisis, and a lot of that was triggered, that was nearly all triggered by Syria, but in particular the Alan Kurdi situation, but also the movement of Syrian refugees to Europe. So it took the impact on Europe of the movement of refugees to actually trigger that big coverage. And then since then, we've seen a steady decline in coverage of refugee issues. There are sort of peaks and troughs, you know, when we had the big exodus of Rohingya in late 2017 from Myanmar to Bangladesh, there was more interest. But take a region like Sahel, or what you're seeing in Mozambique at the moment, it's very hard to get interest from a Western perspective. I don't know how you change that. I mean, we try, we do campaigns, we talk to media, we pitch the media. One of the problems is you have a shrinking media landscape. You have a lot more noise on social media. And then, you know, the media that you do have are often being consumed, again, from a Western perspective, by things like the Trump presidency and Brexit. And there's less and less oxygen or airtime for media to cover things. In terms of the actual coverage, you know, whether it's balanced or not, some of it is, I think there, and again, from a Western European perspective, there is some good media doing some good reporting. But a lot of the media houses are owned by people with vested interests. So the media, the coverage is then automatically skewed towards the interests of the owners of that media, whether that is a state actor, increasingly we're seeing state actors getting involved in media, or whether it's private sector, sometimes right-wing players who have got into this space, and in some cases spreading a lot of fake news and trying to stir up resentment and xenophobia. And that's made the situation a lot harder. In the UK right now, we have what we think is a huge exaggeration of the perceived threat of asylum seekers. The fact was there was an increase in asylum seekers coming to the UK by boat, but the overall numbers of asylum seekers have actually fallen in the UK. But a lot of the media coverage hasn't reflected that. It's actually focused on the alarm side of these crossings, these increasing crossings. So yeah, there is an issue. We do what we can, our partners do what we can, but it's a really tricky landscape to navigate, I think.
Can I just follow on from that?
Sure, go ahead, Lejla.
So my dad works for the BBC, he works for World Service, and I completely agree with you. Like the first time I came out and came out with my interview, I must have been 19 at the Ending Sexual and Violence and Conflict Summit, and I'll never forget it. Like they had to take a picture of me, and it was in some park or something, and the photographer turns up and he says, "Is this a happy story or a sad story? Because if it's a sad story, look down, and then if it's a happy story, like smile." And it is just so hard, exactly what you're saying, spreading fear and kind of clickbait almost, you know, the worst case scenario, or, you know, absolute exaggerations on everything. Like it sells more. Like at the end of the day, the media, as much as there are some really great outlets out there, a lot of them need the ratings, like they need the money. And at the end of the day, people always, for some reason, we always remember the stories that are the worst, even if they're not true. Like the happy stories, you know, it just doesn't sell as much, does it? You know, so I completely agree with you, Matthew, and I do think the media has a huge part to play in all of this.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they have to do their job as well, and what makes a story. But I mean, one of the things from my perspective is that, you know, whatever you're reporting on has a direct impact on the impact of what I do and my project as well, because the aim of the project is to change attitudes and perceptions, and, you know, on a grassroots level in communities. You know, I talk to people who in the West Midlands where I'm from who've never met someone of a different culture. You know, that's still happening in this day and age. I mean, I guess you don't probably see that as much in London or, you know, maybe other cities, but definitely the further north you get, that is happening. There is segregation, and the project is all about integration, and the media has a huge influence on that. Basically, and that's one thing that comes up time and time again in the workshops that I do, and people's perceptions. They talk about how they've been influenced, and when they actually meet someone of a different culture, race, religion, even through the workshops that we do, they have you know, they have a different perspective. So this is something that's quite I don't think sometimes we understand the domino effect of what's happening with the media. So from that perspective, it's hugely important that they get the story right. I think particularly now as well, with all the inequalities being exposed during the pandemic, you know, this is a time where the media can make a huge difference in terms of you know, bringing communities together basically, and creating that harmony that we need in society. So a huge role to play. I think somebody had their hand up, Will Ivory, to
hello, hi.
ask a question. Hi.
I don't know how many people are on this conference from the receiving end of the immigration situation. I'm sitting here in Ontario, Canada, and we have been a receiving nation of immigrants for decades and decades. I've been in education for a number of years. I was also in broadcasting for 25 years. I'd like to speak to Matthew's point. He made a couple of very interesting points. I think that the idea of the media as being some kind of a solution is long overdue. It is highly centralized. There's an old adage that says that the media is the goat that eats everything. And if it's popular, it'll go. If it's hot, it'll run. If it's not, forget it. They don't want it. In many countries, Canada, US, Australia, Britain, the private sector is a big part of the media landscape. And they will run any story that plays well to their clientele. Their clientele is determined by their advertisers. It's not determined by the actual station or network itself. They have a profile of who their audience is. They know what their audience wants to hear, wants to read, wants to see. And they will package any story from any source if it plays well to the audience profile that they are selling to. If those criteria are not met, then the story just does not run. And as Matthew pointed out, there are times when immigration is a big thing, and there are times when it doesn't even exist on the profile. That's one thought. You cannot expect the media, the generic title, to be a solution to all your problems. I really think that there's a great opportunity right now with the rise of social media that organizations such as yours, Salma, have to really go after the influencers in certain social media circles to spread the word at the ground level as to what is going on or what needs to be done. If you want to get the word across, you need to use social media. You cannot depend on the big centralized networks. They just do not function that well anymore. Anybody, if you're outside of their parameters of who they perceive their audience to be and who their advertisers want them to sell to. That's what it's all about. It's selling eyeballs and ears to advertisers. That's what the media is trying to do. That's what the entertainment industry is all about, and that's what the news industry is all about.
Thank you, Will. I caught bits of what you were saying there because your audio was cutting out. I hope everybody heard that. But I take on board your comments about, you know, reaching out to, you said influencers, etc., to get the message out. So thank you. Thank you for that. Please do send us any more questions you've got. I think we've got about 15 minutes left, if I'm not wrong. And we'll have time to answer a few more questions. We have someone asking a question here about how tolerant are the Jordanians of refugees? I understand that Jordan hosts an enormous amount of refugees, and I have the impression that Jordan is doing a great job. Is this so? Mohammed?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, as I mentioned in my introduction, Jordan has like more than or almost 52 different nationality as refugees in Jordan. And we have like 750,000 refugees registered with UNHCR inside Jordan. Out of them, we have 650,000 Syrian refugees registered here. And the good issue that the Jordanian and the Syrian, they have a good relation, some of it like family relation. It is an extended big family between Syrian and Jordan. So because of that, even before establishing Zaatari camp, everybody knows that Syrian crisis started at 2011, and Zaatari camp was established in July 2012. This meaning there is 1 year of receiving refugees before even established Zaatari camp. And these refugees were hosted and accommodated and received by the Jordanian themselves, and they hosted there. And for your information, in Jordan here, it is only less than 15% of refugees live in camps. So the majority of refugees, they live in urban. They live in the cities and the villages among the Jordanian, and they have a good relationship. But as we mentioned before, now with the corona and with the long period of the Syrian crisis that we are going now for the 9th year of the crisis of Syria. Now the burden was coming and increased for both the Syrian and or the refugees and the Jordanian together. So because of that, I want to just echo what Matthew said. We need just, you know, the support from the international community for both Jordan government and in addition for UNHCR and the other UN agency, just, you know, to provide a dignity life for the refugees who are still living here in Jordan. But as we said, thanks for all these factors that I mentioned, the relation between the Jordanian from one hand with the refugees and also from the government with the refugees here in Jordan. It is in a good and it is in a better situation nowadays. Yeah.
Thanks. And Mohammed, you mentioned something about work permits. I mean, that's something, you know, being able to work with a lot of the people that I work with, work permits, asylum seekers especially. You mentioned that they do have work permits in Jordan.
Yeah. As I mentioned also, maybe Jordan was the first country, as I can remember, that allowing the refugees to work in an official way in the labor market, in the Jordanian labor market, despite the high number of the unemployment rate that we face here in Jordan. So because of that, they allow the refugees, especially Syrian refugees, to get the work permit, allowing them to work in the labor market, specifically or majorly in the agriculture area and construction area. Nowadays, we have more than 160,000 work permit issued for the refugees at the level of Jordan. And only in Zaatari camp, we have 13,500 work permit issued for the refugees to go from the camp to work outside the camp and return back. This meaning, again, there is a big, let's say, cooperation and facility from the Jordan government to the refugees who are living here inside Jordan. But as I mean, I don't want just to draw a picture that we are in heaven. There is still challenge for both Jordan government and for the Syrian here. Because of that, also, I want to just to touch base for the media that you mentioned. Now we know that UNHCR, there is the 3 doable solution that it is for the refugees, either to return back to their country or to be resettled in the host country, or there is a 3rd country for resettlement. Nowadays, we face this challenge that we cannot even to have some resettlement opportunity for the majority of the refugees who are in Jordan, who cannot return back for many reasons, for security reasons, that they have their home destroyed back in their country, or they cannot simply return back to their country. So because of that, since like 2018, there is no like a big portion for the resettlement for the refugees here. And also, as Malak mentioned, now if we are talking about a scholarship for some of the refugees outside of Jordan, sometimes this will create not to have all the family unification together here in Jordan, because of that we have the DAFI scholarship here inside Jordan, and I believe Malak, she benefited from DAFI scholarship for the bachelor degree here in Jordan. But maybe for the yes, right, Malak, right? Yeah. So Malak, one of our students,
Yeah, that's
who
true. Me and Tasneem the same.
yeah, so Malak and Tasneem, one of the